are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to How to Choose the Right AIA Document for Your Project, a webinar brought to you by AIA Contract Documents. My name is Hasti Hijazi. I'll be moderating today's webinar. A few administrative items before we get started. All attendees are currently muted. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please enter them in the chat or question section of your GoToWebinar window. And time permitting, we will answer as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the webinar. You'll receive the recording as well as the PowerPoint and a brief survey by tomorrow. So please look forward to that. And all of our webinars are recorded and uploaded to the Learn page as well. We'll go over contact and resource page at the end of the webinar, so you'll know exactly where to go to get the recording for today's session. This presentation is protected by U.S. and international copyright laws. Reproduction, distribution, and display without written permission of the speaker is prohibited. Also, this webinar is not meant to be any type of legal advice. We always recommend that you contact legal counsel. This webinar is eligible for one learning unit. If you're an AIA member, you entered your AIA number when you registered for the webinar. We'll use that information and report your credit directly to the AIA within 1 business week of today's webinar. And again, here's that disclaimer. None of the materials or presentation is meant to be provided as legal advice. This is for informational purposes only. With that, I'm going to now turn it over to one of our presenters, Jonathan Orlov, to begin introductions. Jonathan?
Thank you, Hasti. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Jonathan Orlov. I'm the Director of Project Management at Adrian Smith+Cordon Gill Architecture, and I'm responsible for the delivery of services on a wide range of projects. Prior to the start of a project, I negotiate contract terms on behalf of the firm. Being a design-focused firm, not many architects there are interested in this subject matter that we're going to be talking about, which is why I became interested in the Documents Committee. You'll learn about the committee shortly. I'm in my 7th year on the committee currently, and it's been a great experience. We add new members on an annual basis and are always on the lookout for interested, licensed architects to join. I'll pass it off to Wolf.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Hasti. My name is Wolf Saar. I have been on the committee, on the Documents Committee for about 10 years now, and I'm in my 2nd year as chair of the Documents Committee. I live in Seattle and am the managing principal for VIA Architecture. We're a West Coast regional firm, and we have offices in Seattle, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Oakland, California. Much like Jonathan was saying, I saw a void and filled it in terms of contracts many, many years ago, and it's been a love of mine in practice, and I was very fortunate to be invited to join the committee 10 years ago, and where I can get together with fellow contract architects, architects interested in contracts, and it's an enjoyable experience. I'll turn it over to Sal.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sal Verastro. I'm an active technical principal with Spillman Farmer Architects, and we're located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our firm is involved in a variety of projects, I would say on the smaller side compared to my comrades here today. I've been on the Contract Documents Committee for 5 years, so I'm the youngster here, so to speak. I'd like to jump right into it and talk about our learning objectives quickly. We want to review with you and become familiar with the AIA documents families and specifically some project delivery methods. We're going to examine the available AIA documents, AIA owner architect agreements, so that you can confidently select the appropriate documents based on your needs. Each of us on this panel will examine specific projects designed by each of us, so that you can learn about the process, how we chose, negotiated, or drafted the appropriate documents. And lastly, you will learn where to access resources and guides and other educational material to assist you in the future in selecting documents. A quick overview, I think you got some already from the three of us, about the AIA Documents Committee. Obviously, there's a long-standing history for the AIA Documents Committee. They've been around since 1988, which is 132 years of proven history. The reason we create these standard legal documents is to make the design and construction transactions more predictable, and that's an important point to remember throughout this. We offer over 200 agreements and forms, and they're updated constantly. What makes the AIA documents the industry standard besides their widespread use? Well, it's the volume of case history and precedents that have been incorporated into the documents. As I mentioned before, they're revised constantly. We're on a 10-year cycle at the most in many of them. And they're revised and evaluated every single time they come around, and actually constantly being revised, and with changing language based on the best practices that the industry has given us. You're going to hear us talk about allocating risk today to the best party able to manage it. And you're going to hear that over again, and that's one of the main things that in our mission statement, that's what we try to do. But that being said, we're always trying to improve the documents, and we collect information as soon as it's out the door for the next revision, and we icebox them for the next time. It's an iterative process of drafting and reviewing the documents and revising them constantly. Who are the players involved? Well, you've met three of them here today, but we're members of the committee. We're volunteers on the committee. But there's many more people involved. The AIA does a lot of market research early in the process on every single document before we start to evaluate it. So there's a lot of input that goes into it. It's not something that's done very quickly. And we have a very broad, diverse committee representing all the different parties involved. It's not just architects, as many people think. That's the furthest thing from the truth. But there's still a need for other stakeholders, and we reach out to the other liaisons outside of our committee and other experts who add knowledge and give us feedback. But the heavy lifting is done by volunteers such as Wolf, Jonathan, and myself, and many others, by the way. We're always looking for people to join the committee, so if you're interested, just reach out to Hosty, and we'll get back to you. By the way, it's a 10-year commitment on the committee, and as I said, we go through a 10-year cycle. With that, I want to turn it over to Wolf to start us off.
Thank you, Sal. Today I'm going to take you through a brief overview of the AIA contract documents and then walk you through the numbering system. So the documents are organized into families. That's that column on the left. The most commonly known are those that pertain to the A201 general conditions and conventional delivery methods. And they're designed to work with the most conventional projects. But the other families, design build, construction management, interiors projects, international projects, integrated project delivery, program management, digital practice, and forms for construction projects are all defined as different families with different designators, which I'll go into briefly in a few minutes. The other component are the series. They're listed up there, and I'll go into these further as we go into the numbering system now. So we've often been asked what is behind the numbering system. Why is it set up this way? So this year we're actually spending a little time in these kinds of presentations going through that. So The first position, next slide, is a letter, and it denotes the series. So as I talked about the series earlier, there's 6 series. A is owner-contractor agreements. The B is for owner-architect agreements, and that's going to be the focus of today's presentation. C is for other agreements. D is for miscellaneous. E is for exhibits. And G is for contract administration forms. The second position is a number, and it represents the type of agreement, such as a prime agreement, sub-consultant agreement, or bid or construction forms. The third refers to the family of documents pertaining to the particular agreement, form, or guide. So there you see listed, what I talked about earlier, the conventional, then the construction manager, design build, and so on. The fourth position is the sequence number. If there are multiple documents that fall under the same series, type, and delivery model, this number differentiates among those. And finally, the date the document was released. Generally, as Sal mentioned, documents are updated on a 10-year cycle. The owner-architect agreements are always updated on the 7s. So 2017 was the last update of the core documents. The next update is in 2027. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan to discuss how these all go together.
Thank you, Wolf. For context, we're going to briefly review some of the common project delivery methods. Probably the most common method is design, bid, build, or conventional, where the owner selects the architect, who then designs a project and prepares construction documents. The owner then takes the documents, solicits cost proposals, and selects the contractor to construct the project. The A201 document, indicated by the gray box at the center of the page, provides standardized general conditions, coordinating the roles, responsibilities, and relationships of the owner, architect, and contractor for the project. As the industry standard, the A201 is a powerful tool to allocate appropriate legal responsibilities to the various parties and for coordinating the relationships on the project. Important terms found in other agreements and documents are also defined in and referenced back to the A201. Next page. The construction manager as advisor delivery method includes a third-party advisor to the owner known as the CMA, who provides pre-construction services. The CMA does not provide construction work, but manages and coordinates the contractors hired by the owner. In this delivery method, the CMA and the architect perform construction administration services, and because of this, it requires a different general conditions document, which is numbered A232 and denoted in the gray box in the center. Next slide. The construction manager as constructor delivery method has been steadily growing in popularity. This is probably because it enables greater collaboration between the architect and the constructor, known as the CMC, during the design of the project. As with the design, bid, build, delivery method, the A201 document is used. Sal, I think you're next.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. And the reason, before I jump into this, the reason we're talking about these project delivery methods is that many times an owner is going to come to you or us and suggest that this is the project delivery method they want to use, and this will help you narrow down which documents are at your disposal. But design build, obviously, this method, design build, is often utilized as a project delivery method. So as architects, we have to be prepared to accommodate our client's request to pursue this delivery method and still protect ourselves, which is very important. This slide illustrates the entire 2014 design build family of AIA documents. This is slightly more complicated than Jonathan's discussion on design build method. The big difference in this project delivery method is that the design builder has the direct relationship with the owner. And the design builder can come in several fashions, which I'll mention in a second. But the architect, if they're not inside the design builder's umbrella, has a separate agreement with the design builder, as shown here, but it doesn't have to happen that way. There may or may not be a separate agreement with the contractor, as I mentioned, if the design builder has in-house architects. It's important to note here, though, that the design builder can take on many forms or variations. It could be a contractor, it could be the developer. The design builder could be an architectural firm with construction entities, or it could be a joint venture between 2 or 3 companies, which is often what happens, and that slide kind of indicates this. Because of the potential variations of teams, the AIA documents are very flexible and left flexible on purpose, enough to cover all the variations. And I'll turn it back to Wolf.
Thank you, Sal. Okay, now I'm going to dig in a little bit more into the documents, the owner-architect agreements themselves. So on the screen is a simple table, and it lists the B documents. As I mentioned when we were going through the numbering system, there are multiple types of agreements within a series, and the B series represents the owner-architect agreements. So just briefly, I'm going to go through these. The B101 is the standard form of agreement. It's kind of our benchmark document, and it's the one that's really very common for most projects, conventional projects. The B102 only includes terms and conditions and no scope of service. So it's really for a project without a predefined scope. Very flexible document. The B103 is for complex projects. It's where you have a bigger project team than just the owner, architect, and contractor. Usually consultants are involved in such. The B104 is the abbreviated agreement. It contains 3 phases: design, construction documents, and construction. It does not have schematic design and design development. It lumps them all into one phase. The B105 is a short form agreement. It has 2 phases: design and construction. The B106 is for pro bono services. B107 is for a prototype single family housing. B108 is for federally funded or insured projects like HUD projects. B109 is for multifamily housing. B132 is the owner architect agreement for CM as an advisor, and the B133 is for the CM as constructor. And finally, the B152 is the owner architect agreement for interior design and furniture, furnishings, and equipment design services. The highlighted documents are the ones you will hear us refer to later in the program when we talk about specific projects. So let's go into these highlighted ones in a little more depth. The B101 is as I said before, it's our core document. Traditional 5 phases of service: schematic design, design development, construction documents, a procurement phase, and a construction phase. It, as has been said multiple times, It refers to the A201 general conditions. And in this contract, the architect provides cost estimating and scheduling. The B103, which was developed for large or complex projects, is similar to the B101, except that the owner provides cost estimating and scheduling consultants, sometimes through a contractor. And it also allows for a fast-track delivery method. The B104, the abbreviated agreement, is intended for use on construction projects of limited scope and complexity. An abbreviated version of the B101, it's like the B101 and the B103, it's used to establish terms and conditions and the architect's scope of services for building design and construction administration services. So as I mentioned before, it contains a compressed form of basic services with 3 phases: design, construction documents, and construction. The B109, it's for building design and construction contract administration for a multifamily residential or mixed-use residential project. This is a particularly attractive agreement form for architects that are doing apartment buildings and condominium work. It contains terms and conditions that are unique to these types of projects. It adds a pre-designed services article that includes items such as assessment of project feasibility, layout, and regulatory requirements. Multifamily requires a more robust system to address unique characteristics, developer clients, particular code issues, complex building systems, and multiple occupants, as is in particular in a condominium type project. The next one is the B132. It's the agreement between the owner and architect for use on building projects where construction management services are to be provided under a separate contract with the owner. It's coordinated with AIA document C132, which is an owner construction manager as advisor agreement. Jonathan mentioned that earlier when he was going through the relationship diagrams. In this one, the construction manager is an independent advisor to the owner throughout the course of the project. Finally, the B152. This is an agreement between the owner and the architect for interior design and FF&E design services. It requires the architect to provide programming services and basic services, which include schematic design, design development, construction documents, FF&E documents, construction procurement, FF&E procurement, construction contract administration, and FF&E contract administration. If you're not doing FF&E and only doing design, interior design, or vice versa, it is structured so architects can provide only one of those services. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk about selecting the best agreement.
Thank you, Wolf. When selecting the owner-architect agreement, one needs to consider a number of factors, each in terms of how they affect the others. Going through the graphic wheel here, one needs to consider the complexity of the project and the scope of the project. Certainly a project such as a hospital has unique challenges that are different from, let's say, a small office building. You'll also want to consider what kind of project type. Is it a small project like a single family home or something large like a convention center? You need to also consider the project team. What's the composition of the team? Who's hiring the consultants? What specific expertise is needed due to the project type and complexity? You'd need to consider if the architect is providing services for all phases or just for a limited amount of scope. You'll also need to consider the client. Is it a public entity? Is it a developer who has experienced staff within the organization? Or is it a homeowner? This would lead to very different document selections. And then finally, what delivery method is anticipated? The caveat is oftentimes, as is my experience, the delivery method may not be determined at the time that you need to select the agreement. Okay, now I'll turn it back to Sal.
Thank you, Jonathan. As Jonathan, I think, as he said, I think that last slide spoke volumes. There's no 5-step process here, so to speak, in determining which documents to use, but some of those questions, if you can answer them, you'll narrow it down to a few documents that the AIA has to offer, if not the document. But so how do you pick documents? Even let's just, for example, say you had a design bid build project, whether it's private or public. You need to pick a owner-architect agreement. And what this slide shows is, okay, the owner-architect agreements are on the left and the owner-contractor agreements that dovetail with them are on the right. And you have to consider those as well when you're picking your agreement with the owner, because the delivery method may not allow you to pick you may change the document you're picking depending on that. So after you select an owner-architect agreement, let's say on the left, you have to also select the remaining suite of agreements for the other parties associated with the project, the contractor, subcontractors, your consultants, for example. And most importantly, how the general conditions of the contract will be incorporated. And that's what this slide is really depicting. I think what Jonathan and Wolf are talking about is if the slide, the column on the left shows you the complexity of the projects that you might come across and which B document, the owner architect agreement, you would pick, whether it's to be 101, 104, 105. And you'll notice that the complexity and the risks rise. And that's, again, we're going to talk about risk a lot today. And you'll notice that, not that there's risks in all projects, but you have to really consider those. They're driving factors. The risk is a driving factor as far as we're concerned. As you can see here, the more complex the project, the more risk is involved, and you have to take that into account. Both the traditional B101 and the B103 owner architect's agreement utilize the standard flagship document, the A201 general conditions. And that may be something you want to consider when you're picking documents, and obviously they coordinate with the A101, A102, and 103. So all those will dovetail together on a standard project. The B, as mentioned before, the B101 is our flagship owner architect agreement. It works well for most projects. I've never had a problem with it. The B104 is an abbreviated agreement, and that docks directly with the A101 owner contractor agreement if you choose to do that. Actually, I think that's listed incorrectly there. And those go together, but the difference is you don't use the the A201 general conditions. The B104 has its own general conditions built into the document, so it stands alone by itself. Likewise, the short form agreement, the B105, it's not to be confused with an abbreviated agreement, and that docks directly with the A105 owner architect agreement. Those all go together, and they have their the A104 and the A105 have the general conditions built right into it, so you don't need the 201 general conditions with those set of documents. So that may play a role as to which document you pick. Most document users spend very little time in the beginning of a project in the selection of the appropriate agreements after you get to know these documents. It's a very quick decision. Typically coordinate that with the owner. While it's a fact that all these documents are very easy to edit, if you start off with a good set of documents that matches your needs on your project, then you'll shorten the time necessary to edit those documents and make them marry up with your specific requirements. They're easy to edit, and that's why we say spend a little time, pick the right document, you'll have less editing, and things will go a lot smoother in the end. And I quickly want to mention before we turn it over here is that I'm often asked, I use the B104 a lot, and I'm often asked, well, what's the difference between a B104 and a B105? It's as Wolf mentioned, it's abbreviated for limited scope projects. That's what it's intended for. Like, and I'll mention some later on, single scope like re-roofing projects. But I've used it on full service documents, similar to what Wolf and Jonathan might use the B101, which I often do as well. It's just smaller projects as opposed to using the short form. But both of them are great documents and they work very well. So with that, I turn it back to, I believe, Hasti or Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters for that introduction into how to choose the right document. We're going to shift gears now, and our presenters are going to participate in a panel discussion where they are going to talk about their own experiences with choosing, drafting, and modifying AIA documents on their own projects. So we'll start off our panel discussion with learning a little bit more about the projects that we're going to highlight in today's webinar and what documents were used on those projects and why those documents were chosen. So Sal, let's go ahead and start with you.
Great, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your project.
Okay, this particular project is the Cetronia Ambulance Corps. In the Allentown area, Lehigh County, Pennsylvania. It was a joint administrative operations facility in Lehigh County. It houses the operational and administrative staff, vehicles, and equipments for the county's multiple emergency operations, including rescue teams and hazmat teams, etc. It has a fueling station inside. The building's environmentally friendly. We consider it has a lot of green concepts in it. That being said, what drove document selection on this was, in my mind, the two most important aspects was that this project was done on a shoestring budget, very, very small budget, and we had to meet that budget. And actually, that's a pre-engineered building that they chose to use. And the owner then came to us and said, we want to use a construction manager on this project after we did a couple studies. So that drove us to say, okay, that's fine. So we used the B132 contract, which is this, as was mentioned before by Jonathan. We have a construction manager as advisor. So we chose to use the owner architect agreement. It's called a B132. Worked out very well, and we felt very comfortable using that 132, the B132. We've done it many times, and the reason is it does reduce our risks by clearly defining the responsibilities of the CM and the owner, who under a traditional contract would have different responsibilities than they do under a CM contract. We find owners who are often want to just go back to the traditional method, but want to use the CM. But when they read the new document, I say new, the B132, they realize that there's risk changes here, and they actually like it. The document is well written and is critical for architects to understand that their responsibilities have changed from the B101, for example. So that's what we chose to do in this particular project. Okay, I'll continue here. This is another project, and again, none of these are exciting projects, but so I want to talk about the B104. I mentioned it before. This was a simple re-roofing project done years ago at Lafayette College. It's perfect for the B104. It's limited scope. It's just re-roofing. Fairly large project in dollars and cents, multi-million dollars. Lafayette College is obviously a noted engineering college in Easton, Pennsylvania, and our office often does, besides doing large projects, we get called on by our clients for our technical expertise and ask us to perform architectural services on more technical related projects, building envelope studies, repairs, roof replacements, etc. And this is one of those. While these projects may not have large budgets, some do, they are often nonetheless very important to our clients. And dollars and cents, the risks are equally as important. Anytime you step on a roof, the risks are raised, particularly on a roof replacement, as I found out many times. So, but it's not a full service architectural contract. So the B101 is overkill. And so we often use the B104 just for those reasons. It's a simple, because the client's looking at this as, this is a simple project. I just want to get my roof replaced. I don't want to sign a 20-page document. The B104 is perfect, and it has the, we dovetails with also the contractor owner agreement, which has the general conditions built into it, and it makes everyone happy. On the next slide is another similar project. This is a turf field replacement for $3 or $4 million at Cedar Crest College in Allentown. Again, same nature project. Dollars and cents are up there, but it's a single source contractor. This actually, they considered doing multiple project delivery methods, but they got federal funding on the job, so we had to do it design, bid, build, more or less. And again, same reason that we use the B104 on the roofing projects, we used it here. The client was very happy, and the project went very smooth. So I like the B104. I'm an advocate for it. I do love the B101, but this 104 works great if you have a smaller project. And last but not least, another similar one. Again, I'm trying to show you variations of limited scope projects. This was a historic restoration of a building that was done in phases. The first phase was the masonry restoration. By the way, this is a before picture. I'm sorry, we did the roof first, and then that's when I took this picture. Fairly large, complicated slate roof on a building that was built in the 1600s. And after that, we went into phase 2 and did the masonry, but we kept using the B104 because it was just single source kind of, where we just had a roofer or we had a masonry contractor, whatever. And in this case, again, same reasons, we just keep reusing them and they work beautiful. And everyone's very familiar with the non-complex general conditions which go along with it. So next.
Great. Thank you, Sal. Now let's turn it over to Wolf to talk a little bit about his project and the document he used. Wolf?
Thank you, Hasti. Maybe I'll start just describing this project a little bit. This was Via's first project for this client, developer from Los Angeles that was focused on developing multifamily projects in Seattle's South Lake Union neighborhood. South Lake Union, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a booming tech campus. Consists of retail, commercial, and hospitality destinations, supporting tech, biotech, and research facilities, and is located immediately north of downtown and is served by Seattle's streetcar system. This is also where Amazon has a big presence, and it is a very vibrant part of the city. A little less vibrant right now, but in good times it really is. The project consists of 49 units of multifamily housing. The units are designed to be quite compact. There a lot of tech workers come from outside of the city, and when they move here, they need a place to live. And this is a way to, live without a car, live in, close to work, and it's a nice sort of stepping stone to maybe then create, buying or renting or buying a larger unit. So the project was a little over $10 million was the construction budget. And because of that, we went really to the B101, the flagship agreement. This project was designed about 7 years ago. It was finished, about 2 years ago. And at that time, we were focused on the B101 in our firm. But in this project, as with many of our multifamily projects, the owner contracted directly with a general contractor for cost estimating and construction scheduling as pre-construction services. And like many of our projects, it was also fast-tracked through the permitting process to do early start on below grade and excavation. So it really points to a B103 as being the right agreement for this, but frankly, at that time, we were using the B101 as a standard, and we, as Sal mentioned, we had to heavily edit it to adapt to this type of project. I think I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the modifications and such, but I'll leave it at that and turn it back to Hosty.
Thank you, Wolf. Now, John, can you tell us a little bit about your projects and the documents you chose for each project?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. The first project that I'm going to speak about is the Chicago Architecture Center. And anyone who has visited Chicago has certainly taken their boat tour along the Chicago River. After being in their prior space for over 25 years, the Chicago Architecture Center needed more space. And they decided to move to a Mies van der Rohe designed building with spectacular views of Chicago landmarks. Adrian Smith+Cordon Gill Architecture was hired to provide interior design services to help the Chicago Architecture Center realize a one-of-a-kind Chicago experience. The facility includes several exhibit spaces, one of which features supersized scale models of famous skyscrapers from Chicago and around the world, including Adrian Smith+Cordon Gill's 40-foot tall model of Jeddah Tower, which will be the world's tallest building when it's completed. You can actually see that at the very center back of the photograph there. In this project, we use the B152 agreement, which that's named the standard form of agreement between owner and architect for interior design and furniture, furnishings, and equipment design services. Next slide, Hasi. Una Residences is a 47-story luxury condominium development in Miami with 138 units. One of the defining features of the building is the large cantilever on the 18th floor. It provides a distinctive profile for the tower, but it was really included for programmatic and financial reasons. It places larger units above the surrounding buildings, which offers better outdoor views. And it also locates more sellable area for the building higher up, which generates greater sales revenue for our client. The curvilinear shape is influenced by its location, which is on the waterfront, a waterfront site on Biscayne Bay. For this project, we use the B109, which is the standard form of agreement for a multifamily residential or mixed-use residential project. What's notable about this is the initial agreement did not include any interior design services, which is offered as one of a number of additional services in the agreement. While we were designing the building, the owner decided to have us start working on the interior design. And we were able to do so by preparing an amendment to the B109 agreement and include the B252 document, which is a scope document to include interior design services. What's nice about the scope documents, it's an easy way of providing additional services by bolting on to the original agreement the various services, which in the prime agreement, it already establishes the overall terms and conditions. Next slide, Hospi. The third and last project that I'm going to review is Steppenwolf Theater Company. They're a non-for-profit organization in Chicago, and they're arguably the nation's premier ensemble theater. They were interested in expanding artistic opportunities for their ensemble, while at the same time offering more diverse theater experiences for their patrons. This work was accomplished with the construction of a new theater in the round, which is located in the building in the center of the image. while maintaining their proscenium theater within the existing building on the right. In a way, this was two projects in one. There was construction of a new building and then a renovation of another. We used the B101 document, which is, as we explained earlier, the most standard form of agreement. And that was used to cover both the renovation work and the new construction. Okay, that's it for me.
Great, thank you, John. This next question is for you as well. So, did you know the project delivery method when you chose the agreements on these projects?
Yeah, so for the Chicago Architecture Center, we did know the delivery method, which was a CMC delivery method. Despite this, we used the B152 document, and that's because of the nature of the project, which was focused on interior design, rather than using the B133, which is the CMC document. And again, it was really selected because of for us, what would be considered the small scope of work. It was limited to interior work, nothing really on the exterior of the building. For Una residences, as I recall, when we first got involved in the project, we asked the client, and it really wasn't determined at that time, which isn't unusual. Oftentimes that's sort of a discovery process as the project is being developed. Regardless of the delivery method, to us it was obvious which document to use, and that was the B109, which is really a document that was built for multifamily projects, which this is. So in addition to that, our scope on the project was we were limited to working as the design architect, performing services through only up to the design development phase. So arguably, the delivery method did not affect our work a great deal. For Steppenwolf Theater, that was I'd call it an unusual experience, but maybe not atypical with a not-for-profit organization. We worked on the project over a long period of time with a few dormant periods. And the reason for that is, as is typical for not-for-profit organizations, a large construction project like this is dependent on fundraising. So when we first started working on the project, similar to the previous one, we did not know the delivery method, and we felt that the standard B101 document was appropriate for this scale of a project. Also, it's let's call it generic enough where it can really address any type of project. Later on, as we were designing the project and the client was brought on board a representative with a little more expertise in building projects, we jointly agreed that the delivery method would be a CMC project. So we arguably if we had known that from the start of the project, we probably would have chosen to use the B133 document, which is organized for a CMC arrangement. However, since we already had the B101 document in place, it really didn't make sense to make a change at that point.
Great, thank you, John. The next question is for Sal. Sal, what were some of the benefits of using an AIA document?
Great, thank you. Well, in this particular project, I just mentioned, this was a Lombardo Welcome Center at Millersville University in Millersville, Pennsylvania. Our first, and hopefully not our last, net zero building for a public university. and award-winning project, turned out beautiful. But in this particular case, this is owned by the state of Pennsylvania, and they have their own owner-architect agreements, which to do work for the university and the state, you must sign. So they don't use AIA contracts between themselves and architects, which is fine. We're fairly familiar with them, and there's some quirky things in there, but I'm sure we've all had that situation where we're forced to sign it, so to speak, or walk away from the project. In this particular case, the project went well, but obviously I use AIA consultant agreements with our consultants because this is an open-ended contract, but I'm allowed to use those AIA contracts for my consultants and AIA change order forms, all the forms that Wolf mentioned earlier. We use them across the board, and because the state, they fall short on those kind of things in many cases of utilizing the administrative documents that the AIA has. The project was completed under an open-ended contract, as I mentioned, but we decided to use all the other AIA documents, including consultant documents, on this particular project, and it worked beautiful. Had no issues whatsoever. In this particular project is a Catasauqua Municipal building, an interesting project that local municipality. I won't get into a whole lot of detail about the project. It was done on a historic site. The wood on the steps was taken from existing buildings, and so was many of the bricks that they took down from the Catasauqua supported the steel industry here in Pennsylvania for eons. So the building was very important to the local industry, and it showed in the design. But interestingly, when they came to us, they decided, for whatever reason, somebody on the board decided to use a construction manager instead of doing a traditional design bid build with public dollars, as I mentioned before. But they had a great solicitor, the small borough, and he was very cooperative, and he sat down and talked to us, and I said, well, I think we should use the B132. He read it, agreed. We had very little revisions to any of the documents. We worked back and forth. It worked fantastic, and to the point where at the end of the project, that it was really after we were out of the picture, I'll say at the end of project closeout, there was an issue which I can't get into the details involving one of the prime contractors. When I got wind of it, there was barely between the prime contractor and the owner, and when I got wind of it, I said, stop, read the AIA documents. It clearly defines in the documents what the steps are, and you're covered. And the solicitor was thrilled that I pointed it out to him, and he was when he read it, it was verbatim from the AIA document, so it wasn't something we edited, and it resolved the problem very, very quickly, and the owner was very, very happy. And if we hadn't pointed that out, they would have probably had major issues and maybe some litigation. So in this case, it benefited the owner very well.
Great. Next question is for Wolf. Did you make any modifications to the agreements that you used?
Yes, and I mentioned this briefly at the beginning on Fox and Finch. We, at that time, were using the B101 and editing it to really become very similar to a B103. One key thing that I didn't know when we were editing the B101 is that the B103 has, because the owner is hiring third parties to do cost estimating, the responsibility to redesign to meet the budget on the B103 is at the end of design development. In the B101, that happens at the end of construction documents. So that is, tied in with the fact that the architect isn't providing cost estimating and is an important piece of the B103. So we did eventually, our subsequent projects for the same client are all done with the B103. And in fact, we use the B103 as a standard form for our multifamily private sector work. Of course, that raises the question, why aren't we using the B109? Jonathan talked about how they used it on the Una Tower. We haven't gotten there yet. our B103 is modified. We do edits in it that are very similar to the ones in the B109, but we haven't switched over. We prefer to use the B103 because we don't do just multifamily. We do other types of private sector projects. The other thing I wanted to mention is that on these agreements, we do consult with our attorney to identify some key provisions, and we do include those, such as a limit of liability. We also include some terms from the AIA guide, the B503, which is the guide for amendments to AIA owner-architect agreements. So we have language associated with hazardous materials and accessibility laws such as ADA and FHA. That is a document I highly recommend you take a look at if you're not familiar with. It is a very useful document for editing the core AIA agreements.
Okay, great. We've got a few more questions in our discussion. We'll start with Sal. Sal, did you use any other AIA documents on your projects?
Yes, and I know we're short on time, and I'll just mention that on all of our projects, we always use the G612 owner instructions to the architect on almost all of our projects. I mean, I can't think of one that we haven't done in the past few years. It's a 3-part document we hand to our owner early on in the project, gives us great feedback, including things such as insurance requirements instead of scrambling at the end of the project. I advise everybody just to take a look at it and you use it. It'll save you a whole lot of time. Wolf?
In our case, I was going to mention the C401, the consultant agreement. We use that for all our projects, whether they be public sector or private sector. But one I just want to highlight that we use, not on this project, but we do use it, is the pro bono agreement, the document B106. In that one, the architect's pro bono services are professional services where the architect receives no financial compensation other than compensation for reimbursable expenses. And there's a table format in that document that it assists in providing which parties are doing certain scopes under pro bono and such. So it's a very useful document if you're providing pro bono services. I actually just reviewed one this morning for a small facade renovation for a not-for-profit entity here that is providing community service to the city of Seattle.
Great.
Jonathan?
Yeah, so first I want to thank Sal for pointing out that one document, which is sort of a hidden gem, and I wasn't particularly aware of it until he pointed it out. And it's interesting, even being on the committee, there are so many documents, there are over 200 documents, you kind of lose track of the resources that are available. And I remind myself that every now and then to take a look through, the offerings to see, what can really help you in any given project. To answer the question, like Wolf, we use the C401 document, which is the architect consultant agreement. We use that on virtually for every consultant we hire, and we find that it works perfectly well. I mentioned earlier that on the UNA project, when the client had later on introduced the interior design scope, we were able to bolt on that rather easily through an amendment. And I'd say that those scope documents are very, very beneficial.
How do you approach clients who have their own agreements? Sal?
We usually ask them about certain aspects in their agreements, if they're covered by those agreements, like builder's risks and insurance waiver, consequential damages that Wolf mentioned before, change order procedures, things like that. And we'll often make suggestions, and I'll use the AIA documents as a reference, that these documents cover these kind of things. How do yours do that? Not all clients want to change them. It's unfortunate, but you have to ask the question. And I think if you show your intelligence, by making reference to AIA documents. They respect that, and we've been successful. They've made changes to their documents because of it.
John?
So on all of our projects, when we start, we ask our clients how quickly they want to get started on the work, and almost always they say, well, last week. And so speed is a critical issue. Our firm policy is that we don't start work on a project until we have a signed agreement in place. So what we tell our clients is that if you use a standard document like an AIA document, typically we can negotiate terms much more quickly than if we use a manuscript document that may be alien to one of the other parties involved.
And Wolf?
I like Jonathan's tip on using the AIA agreements as a way to speed things up. We do quite a bit of public work, and in those cases, the jurisdictions or the public entities typically have their own manuscript agreements. Typically, we find they're generally fair, but we always have a full review by our attorney and insurer in those cases. Our private sector clients, some of the larger entities have their own documents. Those we're a little more careful with. One of the things that many in the audience may have experienced is where a private sector client comes with a manuscript agreement that looks like an AIA agreement, but it's not. But unlike the true AIA documents, which track changes from the standard language in an additions and deletions report, it's more of a task of where's Waldo to find where have they changed the language, what language have they dropped, etc. So we really rely on our attorney's help in those cases.
Great. And the last question for today's webinar, how do you think these agreements manage risk? Sal?
Well, all projects are risky. We all know that. What we do in our lives and our careers here are risky. The dollar value on any project is not nearly indicative of the potential risks. AIA documents, in my opinion, are time tested, they're fair, they're clear, they're up to date, and what they do best is they manage responsibilities, and that's how they manage risk, by dictating who's responsible for what.
John?
I'd say in a word, it's predictability. One of our drafting principles on the documents committee is to publish documents that are subject to uniform legal interpretations so that they are predictably enforceable and reliable. So this, in the end, it mitigates risk really for all parties, including the owner and the contractor.
And Wolf?
Well, as you saw in one of the early slides, there was an image of one of the original the 1888 contracts that, to reinforce what John just said, the case law that exists out there is very adds to that predictability. The other point I just wanted to make is that as we develop these documents, we have a lot of input from the insurance side. We have actually two people who advise us on the committee. And I guess what I would say is that the AIA forms are coordinated with insurance coverage that is designed to protect our clients as well as ourselves from the result of negligence. And so we don't have to worry about language that is uninsurable in the documents.
Okay, great. So with that, we have gone over time. There are a few resource slides. There is a guide for amendments to AIA owner architect agreements, the B503. You can download it for free. The address is here. You will receive the PowerPoint along with the recording emailed to you tomorrow. This will also be uploaded on our Learn page. We also have a guide for supplementary conditions for the B109. You can also download this for free. It's used on condominium projects. Again, our Learn page is aiacontracts.org/learn. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer any questions today, and there are a few that came through the chat. So if you have any questions for any of the presenters, you can send them to docinfo@aia.org, and we will get answers for you. Any questions about the online service, you can email docstechsupport@aia.org. I want to thank all of our presenters today who took a tremendous amount of time to prepare this presentation. And thank you to all of you for attending. We hope you found this helpful. Again, we'll send you the recording, PowerPoint, and a brief survey by close of business tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.